While most presidents wore suit jackets, ties, and dress pants all the time, you don't have to any longer. Because Presidents Unplugged has merch. If you want to check out some new shirts to buy as a nice gift for somebody in your family or just something that you want yourself, go to presidentsunpluggedmerch.com to check out new shirts, hoodies, crew necks, and anything else that you can dream of. Now in many more colors and new designs coming soon. I'm very excited for the President's Unplugged merch store to finally be open. Now, let's get back to the show. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, President George W. Bush was sitting in an elementary school classroom in Sarasota, Florida. He was there to promote education. He was listening to a teacher teach these young students how to say words. It was supposed to be a simple, lighthearted presidential event. But as he sat and listened to those children, an assistant of his leaned in and whispered words in his ear that would change the course of history forever. A second plane has hit the World Trade Center. America is under attack. Hold on, what in the world are we talking about right now? Let's rewind a little bit to the morning of September 11th, 2001. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11 was hijacked by terrorists. They crashed this plane into the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. At first, confusion filled New York and the world. News anchors speculated that it was just some kind of terrible event or accident. People turned on their TVs and radios. They were hearing all about this, and they were shocked, but they weren't really aware of the true scope of what was really unfolding. For 17 minutes, the nation thought that this was all just a fluke, an accident. At 9:03, the real terror began. United Airlines Flight 175 slammed in the South Tower, lower in the body, straight in the center, in a fiery explosion broadcast live to millions of viewers viewing the first tower with the plane-shaped hole in it. This was not an accident. The United States was really under attack, and we witnessed it in front of all of our eyes. The chaos spread instantly. Workers in those towers scrambled to escape down the smoke-filled stairwells. Everything was on fire. The realization was shocking, almost impossible to really process. This was something that no one expected to ever see on American soil. No one would ever approach and even attack America. This is really why you can ask anybody who was alive during 2001 and say, where were you during 9/11? And they'll know exactly where they were. When they processed the information, that unforgettable moment forever burned into their memory. That moment that those who lived through it will carry as long as we as a country exist. And these two planes weren't the end of it. At 9:37 a.m., 34 minutes after this second plane, the attack spread beyond New York. American Airlines Flight 77 was hijacked and flown into the Pentagon, the very symbol of America's military power. All three of these things that were attacked were major symbols. The Twin Towers were the biggest buildings in the New York skyline. The Pentagon contained files and records and data that was nowhere else in the world. These terrorists had attacked some of the biggest American landmarks that represented who we were as a nation. And that's what struck us in that moment. Because after these massive buildings, the Pentagon could be hit, what was next? While all this chaos was really ensuing, another plane, United Airlines Flight 93, was in the sky. It was heading towards Washington, D.C. Where those terrorists were really heading in that moment, we don't know, but a lot of people wink towards the Capitol or maybe the White House. Other massive American icons and landmarks that show off who we are as a nation. The hijackers had control, but the passengers had learned through these phone calls, the radio, about the attacks already happening. They had a guess of what was ahead of them, and they didn't want America to suffer because of it. Instead of sitting back in their chairs, they acted in that moment. At 10:03 a.m., exactly 1 hour after the second plane hit the South Tower, these American icons took control of the plane and crashed it into a field in Pennsylvania. Everyone on board passed away in that moment, but countless lives in D.C. were saved because of their courage. The sad thing is often Flight 93 is the most forgotten part of 9/11 as a whole, the events of the day, because they didn't run into a tower, they didn't explode into the side of the Pentagon, a fiery ball didn't encompass them in the moments that they destroyed something. No, they just crashed into a field. But we have to remember something. The people who died in that plane didn't die in vain. They died protecting their country and protecting the people around them, and without their fight, many more could have been injured on this day. And Flight 93, while I'm not going to necessarily mention it again, is an extremely important showing of American heroism, and one that we should never forget. While George Washington himself might not have had an Instagram page, Presidents Unplugged does. If you want to see some presidential content and overall updates on the show, come to the Instagram at presidents_unplugged. See you there. Back in New York, the unimaginable continued. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower collapsed. The plane had hit more around the center of the South Tower than closer to the top of the North Tower, and the South Tower's foundation couldn't hold any longer. The 110-story building, made almost completely of steel, crumbled to the ground. A massive cloud of dust and debris rained over Manhattan, whether that was pieces of paper in offices, to glass windows, to bodies jumping out of the building because they knew what was about to happen. They had no other option. That debris covered the streets, choked the survivors that were left, and sent the crowds running. But still, at 10:28 a.m., the North Tower fell. Hit almost directly at the top, maybe it has a chance to stay up. What had once been the proud Twin Towers and the impenetrable pieces of the New York skyline were gone. In just over 100 minutes, two of the tallest buildings in the world had been reduced to rubble. The skyline and the nation were forever changed. In those hours of devastation, what people witnessed, what people saw on TV, the fear in not only New York, but the whole world, heroes emerged. Whether that was the firefighters, the police officers, the paramedics, they all rushed down head-on towards the danger ahead of them. Many of them climbed stairwells knowing that they might not come back down. Hundreds of first responders never made it out alive, laying down their lives to save others. And to this day, those images of firefighters covered in the ash, exhausted but still going, remain some of the most powerful symbols of American heroism to this day. And it wasn't just the first responders. Ordinary people became extraordinary. These strangers that barely even knew each other were helping their colleagues down these endless flights of stairs, hoping to see the light of day. Some didn't make it, but some did. This was such a terrible moment, and through it, the American fight and the American courage shone through more than anything. Nearly 3,000 American lives were lost that day. 2,977 mothers, fathers, children, firefighters, aunts, uncles, you name it. These were real people. Each life mattered. The loss was staggering in that moment, and it's still staggering today. And it's something we, as the American people, almost can't even comprehend at what a real tragedy this day really was. But in that moment, we needed a president. And this is Presidents Unplugged, so here's our presidential affiliation. And by the way, this is not the George Bush episode. I will get back to him later because I have a lot more to say on him, but I will mention that he is the big end part for this September 11th episode. George Bush that night addressed the nation. After flying from Sarasota, Florida in that elementary classroom, he sat in the Oval Office, and he spoke with determination. He declared that terrorism would not break America's spirit. He promised justice for the people who had done wrong, but he also promised unity, that America would stand strong in the face of fear that had just attacked us head on. Across our country, Americans prayed in local churches, hung flags outside their homes. In this face of tragedy, there was mourning, but there was also a powerful sense that Americans were holding each other hand in hand. In the days that followed September 11th, grief of the American people began to really turn into determination. The Bush administration prepared for what now is known as the War on Terror, marking a new chapter in American history. But before this policy, before the wars, there was a moment, an unforgettable moment, that captured the nation's spirit perfectly. On September 14th, just 3 days after those brutal attacks, President Bush traveled to Ground Zero, the area where the Twin Towers once stood. Surrounded by steel and mountains of rubble and ash, he stood with firefighters and rescue workers still digging for survivors left. They fought tirelessly to find even one American still kicking. In the midst of all that chaos, somebody handed George Bush a megaphone. He was speaking, but nobody could really hear him, and somebody in the background was asking, "Hey, can you speak a little louder? I can't hear you." And George Bush, at that moment, said these now famous words. "I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon." In that moment, the people started cheering, screaming, chanting, "USA, USA." That is one of the most united our United States of America has ever been. We were fighting for a single cause, the people against America. We will fight till the very end. For the first time in days, Americans felt a real sense of strength, of resolve, and togetherness. And September 11th really was one of the darkest days in American history. Towers fell. Innocent lives were stolen. But rising from those ashes was a nation determined to remember and stand united. And George Bush really said it best on his live broadcast to the nation on the night of September 11th. He said this quote: "Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve." And that's the story of towers, terror, and tragedy. A day that tested America, but also showed the strength of our people and how we can all come together for a united cause when we really need it most. Tune in next Friday as we talk about Bill Clinton, the guy that in the 60s was just that chill hippie, yo. But as he grew older, as he became the president, got into one of the biggest scandals in presidential history that if you ask your grandma about, she definitely remembers Monica Lewinsky. Learn about that and much more next week on Presidents Unplugged. Season 2 is just kicking off, and I'm already pretty excited for what's to come. So stay tuned, and I'll see you next week. I'm Ty Svensson, and this is Presidents Unplugged. And I'll see you soon. God bless. We need to make an executive decision now. The executive decision to follow Presidents Unplugged on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today to be notified weekly that your favorite presidential podcast has released new content. Now, let's get back to the show.